Today on Creative Christians, two legends from Christian rock history, Kemper Crabb and Frank Hart, join me to discuss music, faith, creativity, and the making of some of their best albums.
When I started, there weren't many of us. As a matter of fact, we kind of considered Keith Green to be a latecomer because by the time he came along, there actually was the beginning of CCM. When we started, we didn't think in terms of CCM because it wasn't there. But we didn't think of playing churches because they wouldn't let us in because we were playing devil music. But, ArkAngel, its first airplay was on rock radio here in Houston, and we were Christians, and we looked on that as an opportunity to witness to people.
I thought you had forsaken me. If you really want to know how I feel.
What I wanted to do was I wanted to share the gospel. I wanted to do that through music because music had informed me, it had formed me, and I wanted to be able to do that for other people. Music had made me consider things deeply. I wanted to provoke other people to the same kind of experiences.
That's Kemper Crabb and Frank Hart, today on Creative Christians. Creativity, faith, inspiration. As Christian creatives, how is our creativity different because of our faith?
You got to believe in what you're doing.
Listen and let the Holy Spirit lead you.
To be in Christ and have an identity in Him above anything else, I think is extraordinary.
If you believe God's called you, you can't walk away from that.
These are stories of creative Christians. Welcome to another episode of Creative Christians, the podcast series that explores Christian creatives, their talents, their faith, and what they're doing at the intersection of both. I'm your host, Tim Ristow. I'm so glad you've joined me. This episode is kind of a watershed moment for me in the history of this podcast series because my guests are two legends from Christian rock music history. I have a long association with Christian rock going back to about 1983 in Houston, Texas, the very city where I recorded this interview. No, I never played in a band or produced an album or anything as impressive as that. I just grew up listening to Christian rock. And it was very formative in the development of not only my musical preferences, but in my faith life and in providing me another tool to use as a spiritual guide when I was a teenager. I remember listening to The Rock of Love on KSBJ FM radio, Something Better Jesus, in Houston when I was in high school. The Rock of Love was a 3-hour radio show that played nothing but the latest and best in Christian rock. I waited all week for that 3-hour window of great rock music. I would discover a new artist on that show and head out in search of their albums that very same weekend. I can't underscore enough how the influence of artists like Resurrection Band, Petra, Jeff Johnson, Prodigal, DeGarmo and Key, Whiteheart, and so many others were really important in my young life and continue to be even to this day. That holds equally true for my guest today. My guests today are Kemper Crabb and Frank Hart. Kemper is perhaps most recognized as the founding member of the band ArkAngel. Their album Warrior, released in 1980, is a classic of progressive art rock. Kemper is one of the founders of early CCM, or contemporary Christian music, having been a part of the Jesus music movement in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, alongside artists like Larry Norman, Keith Green, and Love Song, among many others. Kemper has a number of great solo albums as well, including The Vigil, another classic, and Reliquarium, a personal favorite of mine. He's also fronted the band Radio Halo, was a part of the band Caedmon's Call, wrote the book Liberation Front, Resurrecting the Church, and produced a wonderful performance special that aired on PBS titled Down in Yon Forest, featuring performances of Christmas music from the Middle Ages. All great stuff. Frank Hart is founding member of the 90s rock band Atomic Opera, of which Kemper is also a member. Atomic Opera has 4 great rocking albums in their discography for Madmen Only, Penguin Dust, Alphas and Oranges, and Gospel Cola. Frank wrote a book titled Joyride, which we'll get into later, has a podcast titled Frank Thoughts, I love that, and is serving as pastor of New Church in the Houston area. Frank also has a number of great solo albums out too, many of which Kemper has also played on. Human Liturgy is perhaps my personal favorite among those, and you'll get to hear tracks from that album a bit later. In fact, you're going to hear some samples of a lot of each of these guys' music throughout the show today. Both of these talents have toured and played all over the country and world, including the famous Cornerstone Music Festival, which from 1984 to 2012 was a fantastic Christian music festival that was held annually near Chicago, featured a revolving, diverse lineup of Christian rock bands from across the country. It was sad to see that festival end, but there are some new great festivals that have been gearing up in recent years, including Immortal Fest in Ohio. Atomic Opera, in its heyday, even opened for some secular bands of the day, including Ronnie James Dio, and an unfortunate missed opportunity to open for Soundgarden. I traveled to Houston and had the opportunity to spend an evening hanging out with these 2 legends and talk all things music, faith, and creativity. I was really looking forward to this opportunity to talk with these talented musicians and men of faith. These guys have produced some amazing music, but they're incredible thinkers too. I've had opportunity to interview thousands of people over the decades, but as I got ready to start recording this interview with these guys, I realized I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in a very long time before an interview. I was a little nervous. These guys, in different ways and at different times, through their music, their creativity, and their faith, had been foundational in my own personal development. It was a little intimidating to sit down and pick their brains. Thankfully, these guys put me at ease and made this a fun conversation. Sit back and enjoy.
I heard Jesus calling me soft and low. Turn from yourself and follow me. Come follow me down the narrow road.
So let's just get right into it and welcome Frank and Kemper to Creative Christians. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here today.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for having us on the show, man.
Yeah. Let's just start right at the beginning. Music. How did each of you first really kind of get into music, playing music? Frank, go for it.
I was always somewhat obsessed with music. I can remember being very young, 4 or 5 years old, and grabbing a mop handle and singing Elvis songs, and my mom coming out from the bedroom going, that sounds pretty good. And then I'd stand up in the back of the pickup trucks in the neighborhood and do little concerts doing like Tony DeFranco and the DeFranco family songs and singing for the girls in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my early career, preschool. And then I became obsessed with K-Tel records. No one in my house ever listened to music. So,
Really?
So I had this little Farmer in the Dell record player.
Yeah.
And then I would buy K-Tel records now and then. So they were like just, Dear Prudence or Roy Clark or Fly Robin Fly. I mean, just stuff that was played on the radio. And it wasn't until I got a little bit better record player at some point, and my mom and dad bought me the number 1 record that was out, which was Elton John, Rock of the Westies. Not a good record. Not really. But it got me interested in good records.
Yeah.
And so I kind of became obsessed with just sitting and listening to music and listening to lyrics. And Elton John was definitely very instrumental for me. I didn't know it at the time, but because he had a poet writing his lyrics, and then he was sort of a natural songsmith, melody maker. Mm-hmm. That was a really great combination.
Cool. Kemper, what about you?
Well, my mom always listened to the radio. And in San Antonio, which is where I grew up, we had this station called KAPE, the Soul of San Antonio, which was like an R&B soul station. Mm-hmm. But that's what I listened to for a long time, and I always listened to the radio and liked stuff. I got a little older. My sister won an LP on the radio, which was a Turtles record, and I liked that a bunch, so I bought Glenn Campbell's By the Time I Get to Phoenix album.
Oh, yeah.
It was the second album I got. And then my father found a harmonica when we were camping somewhere, so an old Honer. So I started playing the harmonica, and I was in the church choir. Then one night we were doing a choir tour. They wanted to do a thing of Oh Happy Day, Edwin Hawkins singers, mm-hmm. which I had listened to because I thought it was so great. So then the director said, well, we need somebody who can hit a high G. And my friend said, he was one of the people who was singing, he said, well, Kemper can do that. I sang, and lo and behold, I discovered I could. So then I started singing, and, this was right about the time when the Jesus movement happened.
Yeah.
It got to San Antonio, and then not terribly long after that, I started hearing, the earliest guys, Norman and the very first Love Songs first record and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So then I thought, well, I can kind of sing. I guess I ought to learn how to play an instrument beside the harmonica because, you can't really do both at the same time. So I started playing guitar, and that's kind of how I got. Then I started writing songs because I realized there weren't many songs that said the kind of stuff that I cared deeply about, and I knew there were people who did that. So that's how I got into that, basically.
I'm going to go the stereotypical question. What were the musical influences for each of you? What bands were you listening to? As you got more and more into music, what ones were the most influential on each of y'all early on?
Well, I was listening, to King Crimson, Moody Blues, Yes, all the so-called art rock bands, as well as, early Steppenwolf and, Iron Butterfly. Stuff like that, as the radio stations began to play those, and of course, when they first started, they really kind of didn't.
Yeah.
And, but when they began to play those, and that was right when FM started, and they'd play the whole cuts and everything. So those were the bands that I was listening to.
Frank, what about you?
What's very different for me between before the age of 14 and after the age of 14. So before the age of 14, I'm listening to Bob Seger and Steppenwolf and Aerosmith and Kiss and lots of Elton John, Fleetwood Mac, Boston, Kansas. I'm very, very into buying records, have tons of records, and just sitting and thinking about what is making this music work.
Right.
And I'm learning how to play some different instruments, but not very well. My family didn't go to church. We weren't raised in church. And then at 14, God finds me in our backyard. I end up finding out who Jesus is not too long after that. And then I want to start writing songs. And I want to communicate what had just happened to me to other people.
In 2015, Frank published his book, Joyride, A Beginning in Every End, an intimate, engaging, and often humorous look at his life, and more accurately, his faith journey. Joyride has tons of personal stories, including many about atomic opera, making albums, and touring. It's an insightful read into Frank's mind, heart, and faith. Here's some select excerpts from Frank's encounter with God in his backyard at a young age. I felt quite superior to all the poor hypnotized masses until I saw God. I don't mean I saw a vision or that God appeared to me in the flesh. I simply looked up at the stars one night and suddenly could no longer sustain the belief God wasn't there. I was 14 years old, felt so small standing in my backyard. I could feel the grass, soft as velvet, under my feet. The dirt under the grass and the air between myself and the expanse of space. I could sense the microscopic universes making up each atom, which in turn make up everything that is. It all seemed too interconnected to be random. I couldn't convince myself, given enough time and space, a godless universe could end up generating me, staring at the stars, trying to not believe in a God who wasn't there. How could we ever suspect that the universe was without meaning, if it was actually without meaning? After I saw God, or felt him see me, I went back inside the house. My family was sitting around the TV, watching HBO, a new and amazing thing in our world. I was still thinking about God, so I got up and walked over to our bookcase. There was a set of encyclopedias, a dictionary, a copy of I'm Okay, You're Okay, and the Bible. None of these books had been read, except possibly the dictionary, for homework. I picked up the big white Bible with its padded cover and gold trim, carried it back to the couch, and sat down. It was a family Christmas present from my Grandma Hart several years before, but it had sat unappreciated until this night. I cracked it open. If you open a big Bible to the center, you could end up in a number of places, but I landed in Psalms. What I found was amazing in light of what had just happened in the backyard. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. I said, "Hey, listen to this," and read the first part out loud to them. "Have you ever read the Bible?" "Of course." My mom said this as though the question was an insult. Of course I've read the Bible. But she hadn't read the Bible. Not much of it, anyway. No one in our house had. I took the big book upstairs to my bedroom and started in the beginning. I was going to get to know this God who wouldn't allow me to not believe in him. So that faith moment in the backyard for you was kind of a light switch, so to speak, not only for your faith, but I mean musically as well.
Oh, it changed everything. All I wanted to do was have conversations about faith with people, try to give them light and hope. I wanted to convince people that God existed and that through Jesus, he loved them. I just wanted to tell everyone that. So it wasn't too long after that that I discovered all kinds of Christian rock that I just loved so much. Some of that being ArkAngel and Kemper, some of that being Larry Norman and Keith Green. Two very different approaches. You know, Larry Norman is more provocative.
Right.
Keith Green's just doing Bible studies and preaching through songs. I'm kind of fascinated with both of those ideas. So yeah, all of the Christian, all of the
Resurrection
Band. Yeah, I love that. Glenn Kaiser, just a fantastic influence on me when it comes to. So it's hard rock, so that's familiar to me. I'm loving that. He's got the bluesy, raspy voice, so I love that. And he's sort of a combination, really, between Larry Norman and Keith Green. It's like sometimes he's provocative and clever and interesting, and sometimes he's just singing the Psalms.
Right.
Yeah.
I was listening to for Madmen Only on the drive up here from Austin, and I kept hearing aspects of Resurrection Band in that album and in your voice. I mean, you're like the second coming of Glenn Kaiser, I think, in some ways. And I kind of hear that in that album in particular, and I can hear some influences definitely in the guitar and in your performances.
Yeah, the big bombastic, bluesy, raspy voices, that's what I always loved. I didn't learn how to do that for a long time. But
Right. Did you guys get to play with a lot of other Christian rock artists, perform with them, tour with them, or interact with them, or work on projects, other music projects with them, albums?
I mean, we opened or toured with, in some cases, played with a bunch of different bands over the years. I knew Keith Green and Norman and all those guys. I mean, when I started, there weren't many of us.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, we kind of considered Keith Green to be a latecomer because by the time he came along, there actually was the beginning of CCM. When we started, we didn't think of playing churches because they wouldn't let us in because we were playing devil music. But But, ArkAngel's, its first airplay was on rock radio here in Houston and stuff like that. And, we were Christians, and we looked on that as an opportunity to witness to people and stuff like that. But we didn't think in terms of CCM because it wasn't there. But because we were around so early on, we did meet a lot of people. There's a guy in town, Ray Johnson, who had New Earth concerts that I started working with for a while, and most of those artists were brought into Houston, and a lot of times we'd open for them. So I'd known bunches of them and became really good friends with a number of them.
ArkAngel, Warrior, how did that album come about? How did that project come about? Were you kind of foundational in forming ArkAngel? Were you kind of the lead founder of that? How did that album come about?
I'd had a band called Redemption before that, and when we started touring as Redemption, but then we discovered that there was a band with Salvation Army in the Northeast, a really good band called Redemption, and they kind of had an album out, and people were kind of knowing who they were. So we changed the name to ArkAngel, and we were touring and playing a lot, and we ultimately played a lot in Houston. That's why we moved here. And when we did, there was a brand new record label, Star Song at the time, and there was a group called Hope of Glory, who was kind of our sister band in a lot of ways, did a lot of concerts with them. And one of the guys in there was one of the principals in that record label in Star Song. And he introduced me to his partner, Daryl.
Daryl is Daryl Harris, who co-founded the Star Song label in 1976 and served as its president for 20 years. Harris' name is synonymous with contemporary Christian music, having been responsible for signing artists like Resurrection Band, Petra, Newsboys, and many, many other well-known CCM artists.
Daryl came over to my house one night for supper, and I had a mountain dulcimer sitting in the corner, and he said, "Well, what is that?" And I told him. He said, "Can you play it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you write any songs?" I said, "Yeah." So I played him like They That Go Down the Sea in Ships and a few things, and he said, "Well, do you have any more?" And I said, "Yeah, I got more songs, but I'd have to play them on guitar." And he said, "Okay." So I played that, and he said, "Well, we want to sign you." I mean, that never, ever happens in the world. That's like totally out of movies or something.
Right.
I said, "Well, you can't because I'm in a band, and you'd have to sign the band." And he said, well, when are y'all playing? I said, "Well, we're playing tomorrow night." So him and his partner came out and heard us play and signed us. Because of that, they were like, "Well, do a record." So, the songs that I had written and that we were performing are what became ArkAngel. And I tend towards the, thematic. They were kind of arranged Fireface and Windface on the LPs, back then. And, I'd become friends with a guy named Jimmy Hotz. And so
another classic.
We helped build the studio. He produced his record, which I played on. And then he did the production with me and primarily with me and stuff. And we recorded it in Pasadena at the studio that label, Star Song, owned at the time, Rivendell Recorders. So
yes,
that's how that happened.
Jimmy Hotz is on a Crystal Sea?
Yes, Beyond the Crystal Sea.
Beyond the Crystal Sea, another great album as well. Yeah,
he just passed away, a couple of months ago.
Oh, I was not aware of that. Sorry to hear about that. Another fantastic artist from the history of Christian music as well.
When the ArkAngel album came out first, I got awarded all these awards that I don't think actually existed. Maybe they just created them to give them to me or something. And there were articles and stuff. I still got them there. They talked about the lyrics because they said, well, these lyrics are so poetic. And at the time I realized, that most of the bands that would become known as CCM bands or whatever were writing pretty straight ahead lyrics, but the stuff that I was listening to from the mainstream and everything were, Yes, and all these people that had very poetic turns in their approach. So, when I started writing about Christianity, I pretty much tried to do that. But it's weird. I mean, it's not that way anymore, but when it first started, stuff that would be considered Christian music was really straight ahead, and which I thought was pretty freaking boring.
I have labored sore and suffered death, and now I rest and draw my breath. I will come.
Your style of music, that medieval kind of Old English style, and this kind of Celtic influences in there too. Why did that appeal to you? Why was that an approach that you were interested in pursuing?
There's two answers to that. One is, long before I was into music, I read a lot, and all kinds of stuff. But when I was in fourth grade, I guess it was, I read the very first issues of Tolkien that were officially, put out here. And at the end of that, I read the appendices, and some of those were about runes and stuff like that. So then I realized that there was something of kind of a historical foundation to what he was riffing off of. So then I read everything that was in English about runes by the time I was in sixth grade. And there wasn't that much, there were only 6 or 7 books. So then I began realizing, well, I could study historical stuff about that. And in that, I came across the thing of medieval music. Began to read those lyrics and stuff, and the early music thing was just beginning back then. So I heard Crusader music and all this kind of stuff like that, and that interested me a lot. And I did a lot of research in that, and then plus, rock musicians, people who do hard rock especially, tend to be very interested in the musical forms that that come along with medieval music, and that's because those were largely drawn from the Middle East. So, because of those, I guess, twin kind of influences, I liked rock music, and like most of those people, I liked, those kind of influences and stuff. And so it was really kind of a combination of the historical, and I mean, most everybody likes that kind of music. Okay. I didn't understand why more people didn't do it. And so that label I was talking about, Star Song, when they signed the band, part of the deal was a proviso that I would do a solo album with a lot of those songs that I had played for them. So The Vigil came along after that. And
I've got here, and I love it. It's a great album.
And that's why I was interested in it. My degrees are in medieval literature and medieval history.
Oh, interesting.
So I, studied a lot about that period.
Natural extension of that. You told me something about The Vigil, too. You're working on a sequel to that. Is that correct?
It's been written since the 80s. I, on and off, thought about doing it. Something else always came up, or something interfered, or whatever. So yeah, I'm producing an album, and when I finish producing this album, which shouldn't be too much longer, then I'll I don't know, I may do a fundraiser kind of thing like they do.
Crowdfunding or something.
Or something.
Yeah.
And The Quest, which is the sequel to that. It's been written for well over 20 years, 30 years probably.
Wow.
And then The Throning, which is the third in the trilogy, is, I guess it's probably more than half written. So
fantastic.
So, if I live long enough, maybe we'll see the Quest and The Throning.
Well, I certainly hope so, because The Vigil's a wonderful album and another classic in your long discography. Touch on Reliquarium. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Yeah, Reliquarium.
That album, which I told you before, I've just been listening to that first track on repeat so much, again on the drive here.
It's the favorite album of mine that I've ever done, and I resisted that album. I think I mentioned my dad was a missionary in India and Africa, and he wanted me to do a fundraiser for his ministry, Servants of the King. He wanted me to do a hymns record. And I said, Dad, the world needs another hymns record like it needs a hole in the head, because there's a bunch of great ones out there.
Yeah.
Even ones by heretics like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. There's great hymns. And he kept hammering me. And finally I said, well, okay. I said, I won't change the lyrics or anything. I'm not one of these yahoos who add stuff to hymns. But I said, if I can arrange it however I want to. And he said, yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm interested as well in Middle Eastern things and stuff. And so I just started arranging those songs just the way I wanted to. I mean, Frank played on a lot of people, but I played most of the things that I can play on there. It was the whole point of it was to raise money for my dad's missionary organization, which it did. He passed away like 2 years ago, but that's where it came from. I think it was distributed for a short period of time by one of the Christian labels, but it's not one of my better known albums.
And that's a shame, because it's a fantastic album as well. So,
but it's also weird in the best possible way, because Kemper and I have talked about this before. So these are well-known hymns that sort of transcend different cultures.
Yeah.
So what would those hymns sound like outside of time, before the throne of God, when all these different people from different cultures show up and sing, "Holy, holy, holy"? What would that sound like? So you mentioned that track.
Yeah.
Well, that's Kemper's imagination of what that would sound like, because, yes, it has the major key melody of the classic hymn, but it also has my abstract sort of Middle Eastern guitar solo going through the thing.
I love that.
So, and then it's got all of the Middle Eastern percussion going on through it. So it's kind of like all of these cultures coming together to make this beautiful noise before the throne of God that transcends any individual culture. I love that.
Frank, that is an excellent point, and that really gets at the heart of why I like to talk to fellow creatives, because that's the type of thing that I love about Christian creatives, is being able to come up with things like that put a new spin on things that have, been around forever, but give us a new way to look at something.
I spent time in India with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
back when, in the 90s and so forth. And, when I was putting the album together, I was trying to blend things to some extent.
Yes.
Since it was for his ministry, and his ministry was both the Africans and Asians, of Indian extraction. So I like the way it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say it's the favorite record I've done. It's the one I least wanted to do.
Interesting. You fought it.
Yeah.
Reliquarium is one of Kemper Crabb's finest works, and he has many great albums. But having listened to Reliquarium completely 6 times now since doing this interview, I truly consider it Kemper's masterpiece so far. It is an incredibly rich album of diverse music, where you can hear the influences of everything from Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Pink Floyd, Resurrection Band, and others, intertwining with Kemper's own musical palette to deliver something truly amazing. Do yourself a favor and pick this album up. Listen to it all the way through with really good headphones, and hear classic hymns in a fresh, new light. The labels of Christian music, Kemper, you and I were talking about this before we started rolling. How do you guys feel about that label? And do you consider your music Christian music?
Well, I absolutely loved the label when I was obsessed with the early Jesus music and Christian rock. And
Right.
while Kemper was building the legacy of ArkAngel and Star Song and all of that down here in the Houston area, I was up in Illinois listening to those records.
Yeah.
And just sitting in my bedroom listening to ArkAngel and listening to the Vigil. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a lot younger than I am.
10 years. Exactly.
How did y'all's paths cross?
I guess it was basically through the King's X guys, because
Yeah.
they had gotten they were from Springfield, Missouri,
Right.
where I went to college, and I had met them when I was doing music and going to school in Springfield, Missouri. We're part of the same music scene up there, went to the same church. And then they came down here and they got signed to Megaforce Atlantic, and they were working with Wild Silas Music Works, which is really about 3 blocks from here.
Oh, really? That
Yeah.
close. I was actually wondering where that was at when I read your book.
It's like 3 blocks from here.
Oh, cool.
I came down here with a band. It was called Love in Gray.
Which was a great band, by the way.
Are there
I
recordings?
appreciate that. Not of the good stuff. There's not. I mean, there's just a
that's
couple
true.
songs.
That's true. Their live stuff was much. I mean, I liked their recorded stuff, but I really liked their live stuff.
I was down here, and they were having like an album release party, and so everybody was there. and the producer of their record, Sam, he said, "Hey, Frank, there's someone I think you want to meet." And at the time, I had long black hair and looked a little bit like a vampire. I was reading Anne Rice. I mean, and he took me over to another guy who had long black hair and was dressed all in black and also looked like he probably was reading some Anne Rice.
And I was.
And anyway,
The classics.
Sam said, "So, Frank, this is Kemper Crabb." That was it. And I said, "Kemper Crabb, like the Kemper Crabb?" And Kemper, being who he is, says, "Well, I mean, a Kemper Crabb anyway." I didn't know that his dad was also named Kemper Crabb, so that probably informed why he said that.
Yes.
That's how we met. And did I invite you to church?
Yeah, so at that point, we had been playing around Houston as Love and Gray.
Right.
And what my songs are cryptic theology. They have been for a long time. So people would come up to me and they would ask me about the lyrics. What are you talking about? And I would say, well, you know, if you want to talk about the lyrics, we get together on Sunday afternoons and over at my apartment. And so I kind of had a little house church of just people that I met playing in clubs.
Right.
We had about 25, 30 people that would come to my apartment, my wife and I's apartment, and we did that on Sunday afternoons. Well, Kemper was a minister at a church, Christ Church, and he probably invited me to church. Also, Sam came to my little house church a couple times.
This is Sam Taylor?
Yeah. And he said, "So what are you doing with this house church thing? Because you're trying to do a music career and you got this little house church thing going. What are you doing?" And he said, "I think what you need to do is you need to take your whole entire house church and just go to Kemper's church." So we did. So we showed up one Sunday because they also met on Sunday afternoon because we were a bunch of night owls. We all played.
Yeah.
We all played late shows.
Musicians
and so
typically are.
Yeah. Interesting. We met at that time. The church met at Lutheran High North.
That's right. I'd forgotten that.
That's not going to intersect for a while, but that's pretty cool.
A seed was planted way back then.
I'd forgotten that.
That's interesting. So really all started with more of a friendship bond, and then the musician thing kind of developed.
Oh, yeah. So then now we're eating Kentucky Fried Chicken after church, and Kemper and I are sitting there talking, and I told you that I was reading Anne Rice, but other than Anne Rice and the Bible, I'd really never read a book. And so he's asking me what authors I'm into. And so I really don't read anything other than the Bible. And he's like, "Oh, we're going to change that." And he started throwing books at me he still does. So I like to read now.
Kemper, I'm not as familiar with your family background growing up. So compare and contrast a little bit for me, guys. I mean, Frank, I know from reading Joyride, you had a tough beginning, at least compared to, a lot of people. You had some challenges growing up, and you talk about that a lot in your book, Joyride, which obviously has informed a lot of who you are and your faith as you've grown, too, over the years. Kemper, did you come from a more challenging background, or were you kind of growing up in the church? What was yours, just so I can get a sense?
It wasn't as weird as Frank's.
Well, you come from educated people.
Yeah.
So that's a difference right there.
Both my parents were educators.
Yeah.
Now, my dad did practice magic.
Oh, really? Interesting.
And repented when the Jesus movement thing kind of came to our area. He publicly repented, and he became a missionary and stuff like that. But really, I had a really, except for the occasional demon, a really stable family, especially after my dad repented.
Yeah.
So my background was not nearly so riven with hassles and so forth as Frank's, and I was more or less taken to church all the time. I became a Christian when I was 11, so it was different. It was very different from Frank's. I think.
Yeah, and that was kind of my sense. So that's why I wanted to ask that, because it's kind of interesting that you all bonded. I mean, besides the music factor, of course, did you sense some of that, or did you learn some of that about Frank early on, and did that kind of help?
I didn't know any of that stuff about his background. I just liked him.
Yeah.
And at the time, Frank never changed his expression, which I especially liked. He just didn't change expression, which I liked a great deal.
Right.
And so did Ryan Bersinger, who played in Atomic Opera with us later. But no, I just liked him. I liked the way he thought about stuff. I loved his music, and I just liked him.
Awesome.
I mean, we were friends pretty much, I guess, from then on.
Yeah.
Even when I, wasn't playing with him or anything, which didn't come till later.
Frank, talking a little bit about your background again, what was that like growing up, especially now as you kind of reflect back from this point in time? And how did those experiences of your life, prompt you to write Joyride? Why was that important for you to write? Just kind of your life story up till 2006 or so, I guess.
Is it? I mean, I say that it's just me sharing the gospel with people and using myself as the illustrations.
I like that.
I'm just the illustration for all of my points.
Yeah.
And it's not a blow by blow account of my life,
right? But
it does kind of follow my faith, and it follows a beginning and every end. Okay, so that idea comes from the idea that God is always preparing us for our next adventure in whatever we're facing now.
Yeah.
So what is he? He was always preparing me for something. He was always preparing me for that next thing. He still is.
Yeah.
Another possible title for the book would be Almost Successful. This close.
This close. How did Atomic Opera come about?
So we moved down here with Love and Gray, and the reason we moved down here was there was a drummer named Alan Doss. He was a good friend of mine. I met him right at the moment that he graduated high school, and he was in my college band that was called Fire Escape.
Yes.
So we were playing high schools and roller rinks and the occasional club at first, and that's what the Fire Escape. So. And then he came down here and he convinced me that if we were going to have success in music, that I should move out of Missouri and come to Houston with the hope that we would work with the Wild Silas music production company.
Yeah.
So he was our drummer, and then there was another guitar player, Eric, and the three of us were Love and Gray. We came down here, we did that, and we were doing okay. This was the band that Kemper would come out and see, and that's when we became friends. And it was, I really liked it.
Yeah.
But nobody would sign us.
So hold on one second. Let's see if I let that train go by.
What's wrong with the sound of trains, man?
Yeah, I like that. Alan would love it. He'd be telling us what kind it was.
Just from the whistle.
My dad loved trains too. As we paused for the train to go by, conversation continued, touching briefly on influential Christian rock bands and their albums, in particular, one Daniel Amos.
I really love when they are obsessed with the Beatles. That's my favorite Daniel Amos stuff.
Yeah.
Motorcycle?
I don't know, is that a Beatle-obsessed record?
It is. That's one of their, later, more famous ones. I've been going back through the early stuff again, but yeah, Motorcycle and... I don't know if Calhoun had a little bit of Beatles vibe to it. I guess it does.
I started with Horrendous Disc, and I think it went into the next one. And so it doesn't start off very Beatles, but it gets very Beatles before the record's over.
Yeah. What about so much of the stuff, you guys probably have opinions on, a lot of the, the remastered stuff today that's really, because a lot of the Christian music, they don't have the masters anymore. I know like Star Song, at least I've heard the rumors, they often, once they were bought out by secular labels, a lot of the masters were just trashed or ditched or lost or whatever. So when they remaster a lot of this, it's going back to a vinyl album or a CD master of some sort and then remastering it from there. What's your opinion on some of that stuff that's really remastered for these digital distribution means rather than...
They're getting better at it.
Yeah.
I like the way records sound in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started running the recording, just the audio. It didn't sound good anymore in about the mid 80s. Just everything. They discovered and invented digital reverb.
Yeah.
And I didn't like a recording for 10 years.
Yeah.
There's just so many bad recordings. It kind of seems like every format had like its, like the thing that, we can do this now. Mm-hmm. So then they overdid it.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're kind of figuring out, no, just let it sound warm. It seems like they're figuring that out.
Mm. You guys have both been in different bands, worked together with a lot of different artists and musicians. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the joys of collaborating with other fellow creatives, fellow musicians?
Honestly, I think that we're like two people that's not really our thing.
Really? We
are very much like we do what we want to do the way we want to do it.
Right.
Yeah. My philosophy is get people around you that you trust what they do and tell them generally what you want to do. And it normally comes out good.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have much hassle doing that.
Neither one of us are really jam band people. We don't really like just sit in and jam like that. That's not what we enjoy. We like to create something, to very deliberately write it and make it, shape it into what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
All arrangements, whether they're going to be performed live or whether we're crafting it in the studio, we know what we want and we do that.
What's the writing process for you? Is it lyrics first, music first, and then how do you meld those two? What's that process like?
I think it works both ways. Sometimes you have a lyric or a part of a lyric in your head, and it just falls into some sort of musical expression. Sometimes you write a melody or whatever, and then you fill it in with lyrics. I don't really have the only thing I think of is there are times when I can't think what to do and I kind of free associate stuff.
Sometimes I have lyric ideas and I'll just write out lyrics to other people's songs or to songs that I've already written. Other times I have music ideas and I'll record just a little snippet of this or a little snippet of that or a little chord progression. I always have a keyboard sitting up on my desk or have a guitar that I can grab so that I can just keep little snippets of things. So I kind of have two piles. I've got a pile of music ideas and I've got a pile of lyric ideas. And sometimes songs show up fully formed. And sometimes I just make myself write the whole thing in my head before I ever try to play it. That's an interesting experience. 3 Days of Darkness was written that way. We Begin Again was written that way. Sometimes it's just go with a visceral feeling. Joyride was written that way. There was no thought with Joyride. It just happened.
Was that one of the most requested?
Well, it's the one that Derek Shulman particularly liked, and he actually insisted that we use the demo on the final record.
Oh, that's right. I was just reading about
yes.
that. Yeah. And talking about that writing process, you mentioned in your book, New Dreams was one of your first, as you say, real songs that you wrote. How did that process develop for you? How did you grow as a musician and lyricist?
I'm going to blur your categories a little bit.
Sure.
Because when I met Doug Pinnick in college, the thing that he really helped me with as a friend, as a songwriter, as an influence, he came to see my band all the time, Fire Escape. But those were Keith Green songs. Those were Petra songs. Those were me preaching through rock music songs. Yeah. And Doug said, hey, have you ever maybe not so much just shove the answer at people, but maybe just kind of incite a question? Just make them think of it, and then maybe they'll arrive at the conclusion. So that was Doug. So Doug he said, I really love your lyrics. I love your songs, but they're so preachy, and I can't get past that. And I'd love to know what would happen if you just kind of let it be a little more poetic, a little more abstract. So then here comes the next 20 years.
Wow.
Of being more poetic and more abstract.
Speaking of Doug, and of course you mentioned the King's X Crew before, you have a good association with them or have over the years. You mentioned one way, but how was Doug influential for you in your development as an artist? Well,
there was the thing that I just told you.
Yeah.
And then also he loves to play music for people. He at the time he had 17 million albums just lining his walls in his apartment. And so I would just go over there and he would just play. He's so excited. He'd play one song after another song after another song, stuff I'd never heard, just all this obscure stuff.
Right.
So that was fun. Like I said, we went to church together, this tiny little church in Springfield, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually became closer friends with Jerry, the drummer, and his wife, Grace. Mm-hmm. And Jerry is a poet. He just writes this complete beat poetry stuff. Mm-hmm. We would riff on that and just talk philosophy all night. And then interestingly, when we moved to Texas, my wife and I became real close with Ty and his wife.
Yeah. Ty Tabor.
So I've kind of ran at different seasons of my life, I've been close to the different people, and I've probably sustained my friendship with Doug the most. We still talk.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know Kemper obviously has been a kind of a mentor for you too in ways.
Oh, absolutely. So like I said, I hadn't read anything but the Bible and Anne Rice when I met him, and I think that's literally true. And he started he wanted to talk to me about my songs, about my lyrics. And he's like, who are you reading? Where's this stuff coming from? It's not coming from anywhere. So then we started talking about all this stuff. My approach to thinking became much more theological after I met Kemper. And I'd already gone to school to be a pastor and a missionary. So but after meeting Kemper, that's really when my education for a theological framework of approaching life, art, music, friendship, everything. That's all Kemper.
In my house there's been a mercy killing. The man I used to be is crucified, and the death of this man is the final way of revealing the spiritual way to live. I had to die. Now if I let this dead man linger in me, I might grow a little idle in my ways. I'm going down to the celebration river, gonna take this dead man down to a water grave.
So how did this band come to be, and what has that experience been like for you? Because that was something you wanted to do early on, was to be in a successful band and at the same time share the gospel.
I think that's true. What I wanted to do was I wanted to share the gospel, and I wanted to do that through music. Because music had informed me, it had formed me, and I wanted to be able to do that for other people. Music had made me consider things deeply, and I wanted to provoke other people to the same kind of experiences. So that's what I wanted to do. Love and Gray was doing that. Love and Gray, I was the bass player in Love and Gray. I was lead singer and I was bass player. I liked Love and Gray. I thought Love and Gray was great, but nobody was interested in picking us up, except for Metal Blade. Metal Blade, they definitely wanted to pick us up, but that was a little small. It wasn't the scale that we were hoping to go for.
Gotcha.
We ended up on Metal Blade.
Yeah.
So I knew what I was talking about. Yeah. I mean, the scale of Metal Blade is, yes, you get to make a record. End of story.
Got it.
That's just how that works out.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to do more. I wanted to do all the things. I wanted to stand up in front of people and share this message and this music with a wide audience. I wanted to be on the road forever. I wanted that to never end. So that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Anyway, so nobody would touch Love and Gray, and Sam asked me if I would be interested in starting fresh. So that's where the idea of starting a new band with new people came from. The other guys in Love and Gray also were not believers. He thought that was going to end up being a big problem for me eventually. It might have. I don't know. Yeah. But I do know that we ran the course and we had no other options on the table. We could keep playing around Houston as Love and Gray. We could have done that. Or we could try this new thing that somebody wanted to put their shoulder behind. So we did that.
How'd the name come about, Atomic Opera?
Well, have you ever been in a session where you're trying to come up with a name for something? It doesn't matter what you're trying to name. So at first, you just throw out some names, and okay, I brought some names. And maybe Kemper brought some, and Tim has some names, and so nobody likes them, but everybody has some ideas. And then you start riffing on names, and now everything sounds like a name, and it's just ridiculous. So you're going to name yourself the Ridiculous Pants Band. Everything is a name. Everything is stupid. But then you just keep writing down all the ideas, and somebody had said Underground Opera as a potential band name. Somebody else had said Atomic Eve. And I said Atomic Opera. And then we did 250 more names because nobody liked that either, but we came back to it.
Yeah.
I know. I was sitting in church the next day at Christ Church once we had the little chapel there in the Heights. And I was sitting next to Doug Pinnock, and he handed me a note. He whispered in my ear, he said, "This should be the name of your band." And it was Pound Hound. I'm like, nope. But it was the name of his band.
Yeah.
He did it. He used that later.
I was just looking at one of those albums too. That's very cool. Well, if Frank ain't going to use it, then I'll use it.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. So then you get to make for Madmen Only.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like, and how do you feel about that album, your initial album?
It was an amazing experience. So we got to do everything. It was at Rivendell Recorders that we mentioned earlier, which was a beautiful studio. Mm-hmm. It was all designed to kind of look like Rivendell. So it was something else.
Does that still exist?
Nope.
No.
So we had a real budget, and we were able to spend a month going to work and just making the best record we could make. It was great.
Are you proud of that?
Great experience.
Proud of that album?
Yeah, I am. There's always things. There's always things. My biggest regret on that record, I'm just gonna ruin the record for you. Ready? Was we had it mixed. We liked the way it sounded, and I didn't want it to have the King's X sound, which is a lot of hot top end on the bass. And I said, no, I've got a guitar player. Jonathan Marshall he's the top end on the bass. Like him and Jonas, they create that wall of sound that Doug does with his 12-string bass. They do that, but it takes two people to do it. So then the record label came back and they said, no, it's got to have that Houston sound. It's got to have that top end on the bass. And So they remixed it, and Jonas's playing didn't lend to that.
Yeah.
And what sounded great when we had sort of a classic, round tone, P bass, Grand Funk Railroad kind of sound,
Mm-hmm.
that was great. But then when you start adding all this high end, every now and then you hear this woodblock sound, and it's just so annoying because it wasn't there.
Yeah.
It wasn't there, and it's not Jonas's fault.
Yeah. Favorite song off that album?
For me,
Yeah.
I mean, you have kids?
Mm-hmm.
How many kids you have?
2.
Which one's your favorite?
Good point.
Probably New Dreams. That's the one that just kind of came together, music and lyrics, and it had some interesting philosophical ideas that could lead to good conversation, which is what the music's all about for me.
Right.
And at the same time, I thought it just kind of came together.
Justice, which also was the first music video y'all shot as a band. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Also, so half of For Madmen Only was written after we got signed. Like half the record was written with us showing up at a little rehearsal space, writing songs on purpose.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we wrote a lot of those things as a band, including Justice.
All right. Penguin Dust, which initially had a controversial cover. Is that right?
I guess. I mean, my wife went to the beach with our godson, and she was taking pictures and had this really cute picture of our godson playing on the beach. And I thought, man, that'd make a cool cover. And anyway, at the Cornerstone Music Festival, some guy was running around ripping all our posters down, came and threw them in my face.
Oh, you're kidding. How was Penguin Dust kind of the next step up for Atomic Opera?
We had written a lot of those songs during the pre-production for Madmen Only.
Yeah.
So these were a bunch of these were songs that were purposely going to be on the second record. Mm-hmm. But then we lost our deal because the company folded while we were on the road, and that was painful. Mm-hmm. And then my band, they didn't want to continue without a deal. What's the point? So then it was just me.
Yeah.
And so Kemper and Ryan, they came over, and we just made the record.
Yeah.
And Jerry Gaskell actually originally played drums on that record, on Penguin Dust, but then a digital malfunction and the tracks didn't work.
Yeah.
So we find this out when we're mixing.
I've forgotten that.
Yeah, and Mark Poindexter, Atomic Opera's drummer from the first record, he just happened to be in town. And so I said, why don't you come by the studio? And we'd written the songs together, so he knew the songs. So he just showed up, played all of them, just in one bang out session. So pretty
Fantastic. Cool. And then of course,
Kemper, he's all over that record, So Penguin Dust is really the first record that Kemper is officially in the band, mandolin, singing, and.
So
how did you come to be part of the band? Did they ask you, or it just kind of developed?
At the time, I was playing with Caedmon's Call,
who are also on the record.
Yeah, and Frank was like, "Well, I'm the only guy here and everything." He said, "What would you think about?" I said, "Well, that'd be great." So, I mean, there were gigs that we did. I think we did one opening for the Call, wasn't it? Or
Michael Bean,
and it was just me and Frank. I had a mandolin, he had his guitar, and Atomic Opera was 2 people.
Wow.
And
so we've kind of got a mini Atomic Opera reunion here today.
Sure, absolutely.
Really.
And we have one every Sunday, if that's the case.
Atomic Opera Apples and Oranges is kind of a...
I'm sorry, what?
Apples and Oranges. It's not really an official album per se. It's kind of a collection of some things that had already been recorded or produced, or correct me on that.
It's an official album, and it's called Alpha and Oranges.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alpha and Oranges.
Which is, of course,
My
a play.
bad.
It's, of course, a play on Apples and Oranges. Those are all songs that were recorded for Madmen Only that we didn't use.
That's what it was. Okay.
But no, I think it makes a nice album.
Yeah. I've only listened to that one a little bit, so I apologize. And plus, my eyes are not working well today. Atomic Opera's Gospel Cola. That's still the latest one you've put out, correct?
I guess so.
Yeah, Atomic Opera album, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually the first one I started listening to. And well, tell me what that one's about.
I mean, for sure, the title song, Gospel Cola, comes from the idea of a little bit of a criticism of the CCM. The criticism is that too much of it was just packaged to sell to Christians at Bible bookstores.
Right.
And it wasn't a true expression of anybody's. It's not something they really wanted to say, musically or lyrically. It's just something they thought somebody else would want to listen to. That is so much the opposite of anything that Kemper and I are about at all. It's like, we're going to do something because we love it and because we have it to say, musically, lyrically. We're not doing this for anyone else.
Yeah.
And that's propaganda or cola. I don't know. It's not make something that you like for your own reasons.
Yeah.
Have something to say that is interesting to you.
Yeah.
Tell jokes that you think are funny. So it was a criticism of that. But that's just, I don't know, that's just really one song on the record.
Right. I love Doxology too. And Jesus Junk opening track. It's great. Great one to kickstart it off. I love that one a lot.
Jesus Junk is the Gospel Cola song.
That is the one. Yes, yeah. I love that.
With a bridge by some lyrics of Kemper's. The bridge in that. Because he goes to the more medieval idea of the propaganda.
Yeah.
The thigh bone of the saint, the whole thing where they were doing relics.
If you summed up your Atomic Opera experience, what has that meant to you?
I mean, Atomic Opera is an artful expression of a hard rock band. And I think that's a perfect platform for poetry and the message of an angry prophet. I just think that's the perfect platform for that.
Is Atomic Opera done?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. You've gone on, of course, and done some solo work since then, too. Human Liturgy, which that first track, again, kind of like Kemper's Reliquarium, I've been listening to on repeat too on here. I really love, and you're going to have to help me because I know this is from the Bible, but Ephatha. Thank you. I love that track. Oh my gosh, that one's been on repeat for me now too. Human Liturgy, great album too.
Thanks.
What are your thoughts on the music industry today from your perspectives where you stand now as artists who've had...
You mean the Christian?
Yeah, I guess let's say the Christian music industry, since that's kind of, again, that label that gets applied.
I don't know. I think it's more like the ghetto than it's ever been.
Really? How so?
Because it's collapsed into itself. It used to at least try to convince itself that it was reaching the world, that it was doing evangelism, but it's not about that anymore. I mean, there's certainly a place for legitimate worship music to be written in a contemporary form, and I think that's fine and everything, but a lot of it is just entertainment for the troops in the church, which, I just think it's ghetto music. It's music for the, like I said, worship music has to be that way.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's going to write worship music but the Christians, hopefully. And, we'll but, the rest of it is, I don't know. It seems to me like what Gospel Cola was about, that it's people saying stuff that they think people want them to say.
Yeah.
And I just think that's an insult to the Creator.
Nicely put.
Yeah, it's become a soundtrack for megachurches or churches that want to be megachurches. And the lyrics are what they think people want to hear and sing. And where is the ache of the artist who actually wants to say something? Where's the psalmist who is crying out to the Lord? Where is that?
Excellent points, guys. Briefly, I know you all are more than just musicians, not to minimize that. What are some of the other creative endeavors you guys have been in? I know you've both written books. Of course, we've been talking about Joyride. I should mention Kemper's Liberation Front, which he graciously gave me a copy of today, so I look forward to reading that. But I know from seeing other reviews online, it's a very intriguing, challenging book that a lot of people love. But tell me about, again, some of the other creative endeavors you guys have been in. I know you're more than musicians.
Don't be afraid of that book. It is not a challenging book.
Really?
It is a very accessible book.
I mean, challenging in a good way.
that is Kemper's philosophy of the church as it exists on earth.
Yeah.
And it's great.
I look forward
You'll
to
love
reading
it.
Yeah.
I hope so. I did try to write it to where it would be accessible.
Yeah. What was the inspiration for writing that?
I had been asked if I ever taught to high school or college kids, and I said, yeah. And so they said, well, we want you to come to do a week to this Baptist church from Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And they said, if you could do that, what would you do it on? I said, I'd do it on ecclesiology. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, there's plenty of ways to know how to get saved and all that kind of stuff like that. But, why you should get saved is kind of missing in the equation. And I said, I think that people get very excited if they know what the church really is. So then I went and taught that, and it was a unbelievable response to that for these kids. And they went back and taught it to their church, and their church erupted in some sort of revival. And then I got asked to do it in other places, and I thought, well, I guess I'll write this down. That's the long and short of it.
I look forward to reading it. Sounds very, very good. Any other creative endeavors that you guys want to talk about?
Of course. I have other books that I need to write. I write a sermon every Sunday.
True.
That's a creative endeavor.
Yes, it is.
Podcast. I've got this podcast that I pick up now and then throughout the year.
Uh-huh.
Right now it's called Frank Thoughts.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very Frank appropriate title too.
One would think.
Yes.
Frankly.
New church. Let's talk about that. What are you guys doing today? What are you involved in? How did you end up in the Lutheran Church?
I had a video production company for a while doing very similar things to what you do, Tim.
All right.
And a church out here in Katy called Crosspoint was looking to buy land and build on that land. And they hired my company to make a video about why they wanted to do it, to sell it to their congregation and to sell it to the investors.
Yeah.
So I made their video, and when they came over to my office to look at cuts and to do some voiceovers and the things that you do,
Mm-hmm.
we were gearing up to do some medieval Christmas concerts. I gave them a Kemper Crabb medieval Christmas CD, and they liked it. And then we played a medieval Christmas concert at Crosspoint that year, and the next year, and the next year. And then they were always doing special songs, and I think they were doing a Pete Townsend song, and they contacted Kemper and asked if he would come front that song, and he did. And then a few weeks later, they were doing a U2 song, and they asked Kemper to come front it again, and he goes, I don't know if I could pull off Bono, but Frank could. So then I went out and sang Where the Streets Have No Name. It went well, and they hired me to be their music guy. And then I was there for 11 years.
And I remember interviewing you for a video during that time.
Probably.
Like that was 15 years ago or something.
That's how I became LCMS Lutheran.
Okay.
And then Kemper was one of the people that suggested to me that I might consider planting a church for lots of reasons. Yeah. And I said, I'll think about that. Would you be interested in doing it with me? And he did, and he is, and we do.
Fantastic. So what's that like today, guys? What's happening in church, and why is this something you both,
Thousands saved, millions healed, 4 or 5 got the baptism. No, I don't know. I'm just messing.
Well, why is this important for y'all?
Well, I told Frank that I would only be interested in coming and doing this, and that was just kind of a pro forma kind of statement on my part, because he already knew this. But I said, I'm only interested in doing it if it's not, funny baloney stuff like goes on in most churches.
Right.
LCMS notwithstanding. I mean, just generally speaking.
Right.
And, and of course I knew it wasn't going to be that way, that it would be, I think the word everybody goes for is transparent, and not have to pretend to be somebody else when you get in the pulpit or in front of the congregation or you're counseling people or whatever. And I think in many ways that our church has accomplished that. And it draws a certain type of person, people who, don't know Jesus from JoJo the Monkey Boy and hear about it for the first time in that way, and EBOs, evangelical burnouts, who have given up on the institutional church, are drawn. So our congregation, the core of it, of course, were people who came over with Frank when he started the church, who were already established, Lutheran believers and stuff like that. But that was a little core, and it's growing and continuing to grow with people who are outside the normal pale, I think, of who ends up joining churches.
Yeah, I mean, we have a vision for what we want the church to be eventually, and that's not where we are. And so I'm just frustrated that we're not where we ultimately want to be. But I'm very thankful for where we are and what God is allowing us to do now, too. And we just baptized an entire family last week.
Wow, beautiful.
Just all the time, people are coming in, and they have not heard the message of Jesus. See, this is my frustration. There's churches on every corner, and people think they've tried Jesus. They think they've tried the church, and it didn't work. They tried it, didn't work. And I just want to say to anyone who is hearing me say that, you probably haven't tried Jesus. You probably haven't heard the gospel, and It will change your life if you do hear it, if you do listen. If you repent and believe, it will change your life, and it will give you hope like you've never known. And so that's why we do it.
Amen. Creativity and faith. That's what this show is all about. How for each of you is that, as I described, that intersection of creativity and faith, your talents, why is that so important for each of you in your lives? That combination of faith and creativity.
If you're a creative and you're a Christian, I don't see any other option. The foundation of Christianity, of knowing Christ, is, living life as a Christian. And if you've been made to be a creative, then it seems to me that it would be an insult to the God who made you not to express your creativity. And there's no other context if you're a Christian other than to be some sort of interaction between that.
So, idea that I got from Kemper many, many, many years ago is that God is the creator, and we're all sub-creators. We're only creative in as much as we're reflecting Him as the creator.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're going to reflect God as a believer in God, well, part of that worship is going to be creating things in His creation. So, whatever that looks like for you, do that honestly. Do that with your voice. He saved you. He called you to be His disciple. He didn't call you to pretend to be some other disciple. So use the voice that you have and say the things that you have to say. And if you do that with finger paintings, great. If you do that with music, cool. If you do that with humor and jokes, fantastic. But the world is just, it's all out there. And so what is creativity? Again, stealing all this from Kemper, it's telling the truth about the world as we experience it. If you reflect the truth about the world, then you can talk about anything and you can express anything. Just don't lie. It's the lying about it when it becomes phony and false and cheese and painful.
It doesn't matter what you do. I mean, I think it's kind of a false dichotomy, creatives, non-creatives. There's no such thing as non-creative.
Yeah.
The question is, how's the creativity? If you're a mathematician, you talk about elegant equations and so forth. If you're a scientist, all those kind of things, you can't really extricate creativity from living any more than you can extricate beauty from the Holy Trinity.
I agree.
So not to rain on the calling ourselves creatives, because that's how we say, well, we're artists or whatever.
Right.
But really, we're made in the image of God, and that's pretty creative in itself. So,
well put. Kemper, Frank, thank you both for talking today and coming on the show. I've enjoyed this a lot. We've gotten into stuff. There's so much more we could talk about, and I know we've gone on a little bit more at length here anyway, but I really, really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk with you guys. This is fascinating. You've got my brain going. We might have a song to play us out here. So
cool.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, this is live without a net. So if you get stuff wrong, it's all part of the experience.
That's true.
Okay. So this is Love is Only Love, song off of the Human Liturgy record. And it's about how love is how we treat people. That's what love is. It's not like mystical emanations that just kind of radiate from us to other people, but it's about love is how we treat people.
It is a deep breath. You only feel it when you breathe. And it is a deep word. You cannot say it when you speak. And it is a circular motion. You only have it when it returns. And it is not a religious thing. Doesn't mean you can't believe in it. And we trade our life for it. Love, to live and die for it, to grow. We'll stand and fight for it. You only hold it if you let go. We believe that it is the meaning of our life. Love is everything, and love is nothing more than love is only. Love is only love. It is not God, and love is not romance, and love you cannot make, and love you cannot fake it. Love is something that we all must do. You love. We all believe in it. We all have need of it. We believe that it is the reason for our life. Love is everything, and love is nothing more than love is only. Love is only, is everything, and love is nothing more than. Love is only, love is only, love is only, love is everything, and love is nothing more than love is only. Love is only love.
That does it for this episode of Creative Christians. My guests today have been Kemper Crabb and Frank Hart. You can find out more about Kemper and his music at kempercrabb.net, and more about Atomic Opera, Frank, and his solo work at frankhart.com, as well as info about their church, New Church, at newchurch.love, L-O-V-E. All this info and more details will be available in the show notes or the description for this episode. Thanks for joining us. Go to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast distributor. Be sure to subscribe to catch each and every new episode. After listening, take a moment to rate the show. If you're really feeling generous, I'd love it if you left a brief review as well. Let me and others know what you like about Creative Christians. Thank you for all of you who have already been leaving feedback and reviews. It is very much appreciated. You can also email me directly with your feedback, comments, or questions at tim@timristow.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Tim Ristow. Until next time, stay creative and stay in God's Word. Blessings. Creative Christians is produced by yours truly, Tim Ristow. Special thanks to my guests, Frank Hart and Kemper Crabb, and to Memorial Lutheran Church in Katy for graciously allowing us to record in their sanctuary. As always, a shout out to my lovely and supportive wife, Tracy Ristow. Creative Christians is an audio production of Tim Ristow Productions. Visit timristow.com to learn more. That's TIMRISTOW.com.